Hey guys, Rob here with McDojoLife, and the video you just got done watching took place November 29th, 2018 inside Del Mar Jiu-Jitsu Club. The instructor's name is Francisco Sinistro Turalde, and the student's name, Jack Grenier. Mr. Grenier was rendered paralyzed from the neck down when the incident occurred, crushing his cervical vertebrae and giving him a laundry list of medical issues. Mr. Grenier sued the academy and was recently awarded the sum of $46 million in that lawsuit. Now, if that story looks familiar, it's probably because you've been hearing about it all over the internet, and we also did a McDojo news story about it not that long ago. There has been a lot that has come to light since then. Now, when I released the original story, there was people coming out of the woodwork to give their opinion. The issue at the time was no one was actually providing us any evidence to go with their opinion. So the instructor in the incident actually reached out to me personally, and when he did so, I offered to give him an opportunity to come on and do a complete interview to give his side of what happened. He declined to give an interview, but he did ask me to release a statement on my Instagram, which I did. The day after I posted that up for him, I was actually contacted back again by someone else asking that I take it down because apparently they will be moving into the appeals process. So, once again, tried to help out, took it down. And then it happened. The video of the incident was put out. That video was put out just a few days ago on Tom DeBlass's Instagram account. Now, I don't know about you, but after watching that, it seems like it's a complete accident. It does not look like there's malicious intent. But maybe you don't want to take my word for it. Let's listen to a few other experts on the subject.
I saw the video and it's a horrific accident.
I don't think Sinistro did it on purpose.
It was definitely an accident.
Yeah, it's a freak accident.
It was definitely a freak accident. It was not malicious.
I cut those videos short just to get right to the point because I didn't want this video to be an hour and a half long. But if you're a Sensei level member or above here on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see those videos in their entirety so you can hear everything they had to say. Which brings me to a subject matter expert who was actually involved in the case, Henner Gracie. He was specifically brought on as a subject matter expert for the prosecution. Not too long after that video had surfaced of the incident, Henner Gracie actually put out his own statement as well. In his statement, he actually shows Leo Vieira demonstrating the technique, and then he goes on to explain why he feels that this entire thing was preventable due to little nuances in the technique that weren't done properly.
So since it's very hard to tell what's going on between two no-gi grapplers who are wearing black rash guards, this footage that was referenced several times during trial was edited to add color to the left arms of both Iturralde and Greener so that you can see where Iturralde's arms are relative to Greener's. So I'm going to go forward frame by frame here, and again, to the untrained eye, you're looking at this from a rear angle, it looks like he's in a normal over-under position. But what happens is, as you begin to kind of frame forward here, you're going to see that, in fact, Iturralde's left arm wasn't around the neck. It's, in fact, around the outer bicep-tricep area of Greener's left arm. And if you keep going further, you'll see that that arm continues to slide down to where, essentially, as you can see there, Iturralde's left arm is binding Greener's left arm to his rib cage, completely removing that arm from the grapple. So as we continue to play forward here, you'll see that Iturralde then makes the decision with this modified arm configuration where the arm is bound to Greener's ribs and the opposite arm on the other side is underneath Greener's armpit. So one arm is under the armpit, one arm is binding it to his rib cage. So Iturralde decides to initiate the technique, diving forward, but in doing so, Jack lands straight on his head, his neck folding in one direction, both of their bodies folding in the opposite direction, causing the neck break. And then once it comes out here, you see once again Iturralde's two arms here, both in red, and Greener's left arm in green, and how Iturralde's arms are in fact around the torso and over the arm of Greener, instead of being over the shoulder in a conventional manner or in a double underhook manner underneath both of Greener's armpits. So modified arm configuration that resulted in the neck break.
Now that was Henner explaining why he believes that technique was done improperly. In response, Sinistro put out his own video explaining how and why he does the technique the way he does it.
So let's say we made our way to the back, right? I'm gonna go for a modified seat though. So instead of going over the shoulder, I'm gonna go around his biceps, Okay, this is gonna be a lot better for chopping this leg of the table. That way, when I roll just a little bit over the side, my partner's gonna fall over because he has no base over his side. So the only way my partner can roll, or I'm forcing him to roll, is over his left side, right? So we're gonna go right here. Now the easy way of doing this technique, or the basic way, is just stay tight and rolling over the shoulder, opening the leg wide, so I can make my partner roll. Now let's say my partner has a better base and he doesn't fall over this side. Maybe I tried already to take it back on a roll before or doing this same roll and he's not falling for it. So I'm gonna do a modified version, and this is gonna allow me to distract my partner so I can redirect him into the other side. So check this out. So from here, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna lift up, I'm gonna base with my foot right next to his head. Once I base there, I'm gonna bring my knee over his other side and then roll him all the way over and secure the back.
Now back to Henner's video. He talks about the importance of safety in the classroom.
Even if you have a solid waiver and a general liability insurance policy, you must take reasonable steps to ensure the safety of your students. Being a part of this case taught me a lot about how the legal system defines risk and standards of care in this industry. Accidents will happen in any contact sport, but as long as you maintain the safety of your students as a top priority, you'll be in a much better position if something happens on your watch.
He discusses waivers, why they're important, and why you should make sure yours is legally sound.
Waivers matter. Now, there is some lingering concern out there that waivers aren't valid. Now, in this particular case, the waiver wasn't admissible as evidence because of some technical errors in the waiver itself. But nothing has led me to believe that waivers as a whole are not valid. So once again, I'm not giving legal advice. This is just a good reminder to make sure that you get your waiver drafted by an attorney and you have it updated and checked often to make sure it's good to go.
And he talks about the importance of insurance.
Get insurance. Every Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school should have general liability insurance, if for nothing else, to cover you in the event of a tragedy like this one. Fortunately, in this case, the school did have insurance, and it's my understanding that the damages owed to Mr. Greener will be paid by the insurance company, and that burden does not go on the school owner or Mr. Iturralde himself.
I don't know about you, but to me it seems like those three things are good things to bring up. They seem important. They seem like something that you guys should be paying attention to and should care about in your school. But even with those three things being very sound, and even with his technical explanation of why he believes the technique was done incorrectly, why is it that people are upset with Henner online? Well, let's cover some of those things. One of the big things that keeps popping up online over and over again that people are upset about is the fact that he got paid to be a subject matter expert for the prosecution. On one hand, he says this statement.
Now, it's worth noting that never before in my life had I testified as an expert witness, and in this case, I only decided to do so after reviewing the tape, the footage of the incident, and realizing for myself the ways in which this injury was avoidable.
And then it's followed by this statement.
And like most expert witnesses, I was compensated for the time that I put into this case.
Which makes it sound a lot like this.
I can answer that. For money.
So what it comes off like is that he wouldn't have done it unless he got paid. And that's what the public is hearing when he says those two things. And get paid, well, he did. Apparently he was paid $100,000 to be a subject matter expert for the prosecution. People were going after him pretty relentlessly about that, so he recently made this post. In that post, it shows a check written out to Spinal Cord Injury Network. The description of that post said, since my compensation appeared to become a distraction for some from the much bigger discussion we should be having. After that post, it seems people were still giving him a hard time about that. I've seen comments online from people who believe the only reason he did that was because he was taking heat online. Me personally, I would imagine if I had some severe spinal cord injury and that $100,000 went towards something that could help me either walk again or not be in pain all the time, I wouldn't give a what his intent was. All I would care about is the fact that I'm getting help that I need. But that's just me. Another thing that he took heat for online was the fact that his cousin was a subject matter expert for the defense side.
The expert witness on the defendant's side, who happens to be a second cousin of mine.
Out of the thousands of jiu-jitsu instructors that do not agree with Henner, and are not related whatsoever, the defense decided to get a cousin of his. That's not on Henner. That's on a stupid-ass defense attorney. And if Sinistro is going back to appeals to fight this, you might want to get a different subject matter expert on your side. Just tossing it out there. The next thing I saw him take heat for online was admitting openly that the language that he used could be misleading.
Mr. Iturralde went into a full headstand with Mr. Greener's arm restricted, placing all the weight of both of their bodies directly on his head and neck. And this is where the term spike entered into my descriptive equation, and I now understand that without clear context, that word can be confusing and misleading, and that was by no means my intent.
I've tried my best to show both sides, good and bad, of this entire thing. I'm on no one's side, but there's no excuse. There should be no misleading language being used when you're talking to a jury. That brings us to Mr. Grenier and his injuries. First, let's let an actual doctor tell us about those injuries.
So people know who I am. My name is Dr. Mike Pekarsky. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a board certified orthopedic clinical specialist. I'm also a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So this most recent incident by Jack Greener, he was a white belt who got injured in a jiu-jitsu class, and he suffered a severe spinal cord injury. And there's been a lot of attention lately just because of this massive lawsuit that's happened. My intention with this video is just to discuss the severity of his injury. I've heard a lot of people discuss that, mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, they're combat sports, injuries happen. And yes, that's true, and I suffered many injuries. But an injury such as this is pretty severe, very catastrophic. So I'm going to go over what his injuries were and what were some of the side effects. So the first thing we have to discuss when it comes to Jack Greener's injuries is what actually happened. So after the incident, which was a hypercervical extension injury, he suffered a cervical vertebral fracture of C4, C5. He suffered an incomplete spinal cord injury of C4. He suffered a left vertebral artery dissection, which resulted in a basilar artery thrombosis, which caused there to be a blockage of the basilar artery. And the process, the surgeries he had an anterior cervical discectomy. He had an anterior cervical fusion of C5 with titanium cage. He had a posterior cervical fusion of C4 through C6, and he had a left vertebral artery stent. So now we can talk about his spinal cord injury. So an incomplete spinal cord injury means that the spinal cord was not completely severed. Thankfully, because if it was complete, there would be no chance of recovery, and this would be permanent. So the fact that it was incomplete means that he was able to make some level of recovery. Now at the level, C4 means everything below C4 is going to be affected, which means that he was going to have loss of function of both arms and both legs. There was going to be bladder and bowel dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, and breathing difficulties. So one of the things that they discussed is that he was put on a catheter because his bladder function was affected, and he was put on a ventilator, meaning that he needed that ventilator to breathe for some capacity while he was in the hospital. So now we can discuss the cervical fusion. So of all the things he had to endure, this is probably the least of an issue, but there is still some complications that are going to happen after this. So a cervical fusion means that those segments are locked in place and they're not going to be able to move. Surgeons are starting to use this option less, and it's more of a last resort, because now what they've found is that once they do a fusion, generally they're going to have to do more fusions of segments above and below, because if he had a fusion of C4 through C6, that means that he's going to have more forced movement on C3 and C7. Now, the cervical mechanics is generally you can break it up to the upper and lower cervical. So the upper cervicals could be C0, C1, C1, C2, and then your lower cervical is C3 through C7. So for him to have loss of function from his lower cervical means he's going to have a very restricted range of motion, and then there's obviously the big worry of needing more fusions later on through the rest of his life. So now we can look at a basilar artery thrombosis. And this is actually a pretty scary injury. This is a injury that has a very high mortality and morbidity rate, meaning, the mortality rate is generally greater than 85%, which means that most people are going to die when they suffer from this. And if you are lucky and they're able to do this recanalization, there's still a 40% chance of death. Even for those people who survive, there's still a pretty significant chance of disability afterwards. And then again, the big worry too is that this person is now going to be at a higher risk of a recurrent stroke. So this is a pretty scary injury when someone has this level of stroke. So now we can look at what happens when the basilar artery is occluded. So some of the acute neurological signs: he's going to have motor deficits, he's going to have hemiparesis or quadriparesis, meaning that he's going to have issues with one side of his body or potentially both sides of his body. He could have a facial palsy, meaning that his face is going to freeze, like it's going to sag. Dizziness, headaches, and dysarthria, so he's going to have difficulty speaking. One of the things that's really scary with this basilar artery occlusion is there's a higher chance of something called lock-in syndrome, which in my opinion is probably the worst thing that can ever happen, meaning that that person has no control over their body aside from eye movement. So they're completely conscious, they have no ability to talk, speak, move their limb. The point of this video was to show the severity of Jack Greener's injuries. As you can see, that I think this was considered very catastrophic, probably the worst injury I've ever heard of happening in jiu-jitsu or grappling.
Going back to why people were upset about the original articles, they left something out. He's no longer paralyzed. That's right. He was able to make a pretty miraculous recovery. People were actually pissed off about that for some reason online. Look, for anyone out there who is mad that this guy is better now, he is not fully recovered, nor will he ever be fully recovered. That dude has to live the rest of his life with a slew of issues with his body, including incontinence. If you really want to get an insight to what this guy had to go through and where he is now, which is not fully recovered by any means, check out a small documentary online called Paralyzed to Peaks about him. There was definitely some stuff I didn't agree with that he said as well, including the statement that he made online where the technique that was used against him was illegal. It wasn't illegal. I also don't agree with the original narratives that came out in the original articles about him being a brand new white belt. He had been doing jiu-jitsu for quite a while, and he even had grappling experience in high school. But he was a white belt. Now, had he been training for a while? Absolutely. But his instructor labeled him the skill level of white belt. If his instructor thought he was above a white belt level, he would have awarded him something above a white belt level, like a blue, a purple, brown, or black. But he didn't. He awarded his skill level as white belt, where most of us would consider a beginner in jiu-jitsu. Now, on the other side of that, there are a lot of people who are white belts for a very long time, and for all intents and purposes, what one instructor might consider one skill level, another instructor might have given him a promotion. So that's a nuanced thing that is very a semantical argument, to be honest. Some people were even upset about the dollar amount that this guy got. Well, to help you understand that better, here's a lawyer.
$46 million. That's how much a San Diego jury just awarded a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who suffered serious injuries while training. There's a lot of online reactions about this, but I want to talk about some of the legal issues at play here. Number one, the dollar figure. That leads the headlines. It's a lot of money, $46 million. But there's a few things you should keep in mind. This money was designed to give the plaintiff compensation for a lifetime of lost earnings, a lifetime of medical care, and a lifetime of pain and suffering. The injury was quadriplegia, or partial quadriplegia, where the person permanently lost the function of all four of their limbs to a certain extent. So the dollars are big because the injury being compensated is big, but the real thing is the plaintiff will never see that money. There is no way the plaintiff's going to see $46 million. That's just a dollar figure the jury wrote on a sheet of paper. But the plaintiff can't collect what isn't there. And there's no way the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school has that much money. There's no way their insurance policy has limits for that much money. What's really going to happen is the plaintiff will get whatever the policy limits are for the defendant's policy, and then either work out a deal with the gym for a payment plan, or else that gym goes bankrupt. That's it. But the plaintiff isn't seeing $46 million.
While I understand people were upset about the original articles that came out about this case, still doesn't change the facts. Yes, they did not divulge in the original articles that he is now currently walking, but also they would have to go into the details that he's still messed up for the rest of his life. And yes, he was not a fresh white belt, and nobody should have said that because that's ridiculous. But on the other hand, he's still got his neck broken. The important part here is that the dude was able to recover somewhat and go on to try to inspire other people. Most people with those kind of injuries die. He was able to get up and try to inspire other people. We shouldn't look down upon that. I just find the whole thing ridiculous because no matter what, the dude still did get his neck broken in a jiu-jitsu class. This brings us to the instructor himself, Mr. Sinistro. I personally do not think he's a bad guy. I do not think that he did this on purpose. But that does not change the fact that he was found negligent in a court of law. Now, to my knowledge, it is being appealed. And if that's the case, it could go back to court. But as of right now, he was found negligent. I understand that that bothers people, but it's still true. After talking to as many people as I can, going live, having open conversations, it seems to all boil down to that most people are upset about this because they simply don't understand the difference between intent and negligence in a court of law. So to help explain that, here's a lawyer.
Hi, my name's Adam Wormland. I'm an attorney in New York, known as the Law Bulldog. I've been asked to discuss the difference between negligence versus an intentional act. Negligence is simply the failure to do something properly, which would result in some sort of injury. There's 4 elements to any negligence claim, and that is owing a duty of care to someone, breaching that duty, there being a causation between the breach of that duty and the resulting damages. It's not an intentional act because he didn't intend to cause the injuries and hurt the student. If he intended to do it and it was done on purpose, then it would not be a negligence claim, and the insurance for the dojo would not pick up because they only insure negligent acts. So if it's intentional, it's a whole different story than a negligent act, but you can be liable for your negligence, which causes severe injuries to somebody else. In this case, the white belt student was able to get a verdict and collect that money against the dojo for the negligent acts rather than his intentional acts.
Well, maybe you like the first lawyer in this video. Let's see what he has to say about it.
The second thing that's talked a lot about is whether the instructor actually was negligent. If you train in jiu-jitsu and you watch the footage, it's clear the instructor didn't intend to injure the student. It was an accident in that way of looking at it. But these lawsuits are based on negligence. It just comes down to carelessness. So the question is, was it careless for the instructor to try this high rolling back take when the plaintiff's head was in an unsafe position? A jury said yes. If you run this trial again, another jury might say no. But that's the way the system works. We're simply talking about careless coaching. And the last thing I see people say is this is going to change everything. This is going to hurt jiu-jitsu. What's interesting is nobody's saying that the fact that somebody could be paralyzed is going to hurt jiu-jitsu. They're saying the fact that there was a lawsuit is going to hurt jiu-jitsu. The reality is that's not true. This lawsuit didn't create any new precedent. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the law. The law always has been and still is. If you're a coach, you have to take care of your students. You have to teach things in a reasonably safe way. And if you don't, you can be sued for the harm you caused. Here, the jury thought the coach didn't do things safely. That's all that this case is about, but it's not going to undo the sport. If you're a coach, take your students' safety seriously and train smart, train safe. Thank you.
This entire thing, though, can be learned from, and that's the important thing here. Negligence is defined as failure to use reasonable care resulting in damage or injury to another. Intent is defined as intention or purpose. So the question here is for all of us, Do we sit here and keep bitching and moaning and complaining and finger pointing, which, by the way, none of that changes what happened? Or do we have good intent moving forward and have the intent of making sure that we keep our students safer and we do not fall into our own negligence case by not doing the best we can to make sure our classrooms are safer? That brings us to the question of the day. What have you learned from this case that you would incorporate into your school to make sure that you keep your students safer so that way something like this doesn't happen? So be sure before you add anything else to this, make sure you answer that question so that way I know you watched the full video. As always, thank you all for the likes, comments, shares, subscriptions, and all that other crap people online tell you to do. Keep the martial arts legit.
My baby got robbed the other day by degenerate. So she wanted to learn some new form of this self-defense. So she did her research and perused it online and found this dude said he could move shit with his mind. He called himself Seafood Paul Zimmerman. He got a dojo with a strip mall near Cinnabon. Now she spends all day trying to break boards with her thoughts, but the only thing she's breaking is my little life.